Welcome back to another lesson in growth. Okay, our second week here. Today we're going to talk about praise and worship. Okay, these are the next steps in Christian walk. This is a fun topic to talk about. Again, it's not going to be long, but it is definitely a fun topic to talk about because it's one of my favorite. Dealing with praise and worship. I'm a musician at heart. I play about 9 different instruments, and I love music. And I thank God that God created us as musical beings. Everything about this world, sound-wise, is musically inclined. Even my voice is speaking at a tone. Natural sounds that you hear in the world, like a bell, church bell ringing, or a car horn honking, or someone yelling. It's all at a pitch. And so I love music. I've come to love music, and I don't know if you're a musical type of person, but I love music, and I thank God that God has given us the gift of music and has given us the opportunity to worship Him through the concept of music. And I want to talk about praise and worship today so that we can find out our next steps in growth. So we talked about discipleship, we talked about righteousness, and now we want to talk about praise and worship. Okay, now as with any concept, there needs to be a foundation. Any concept, there always needs to be a foundation laid. So before we talk about growth in praise and worship, we should come to the conclusion about what praise and worship actually is. Okay, so what is worship? Let's take a look. Again, I want you to pause the video, and I want you to find Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1 through verse 8. Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 1 through verse 8. Okay, I want you to find that, pause the video, find that, and then unpause the video, and let's read together. All right, so now that you have your text, let's read together in verse 1. It says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I also saw the Lord sitting upon the throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim," those are angels. Each one had 6 wings, with 2 covered his face, with 2 covered his feet, and with 2 he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door were moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off of the altar, and he laid it upon my tongue, and said, Lo, this has touched my lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and whom will go for us? And then I said, I responded, Here am I, send me, Lord. Now, first, true worship is not an escape from reality. Okay, we love to escape from reality. We love to do that. Okay, we do that by a lot of different things. People do it by drugs and alcohol and sex and all kind of thrill seeking, and we try to get away from reality. We don't like the reality of our lives, and so we try to get away from it. And when we come to church, we bring that wrongful mindset in as well. God doesn't want us to run from our problems, and He certainly doesn't want us to face reality. Worship is not something that allows us to escape from reality. It's actually something that is done in the midst of life. Isaiah begins this passage with a very interesting statement. In the year that King Uzziah died, I also saw the Lord. It's almost like saying, in the year that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, I worshiped God. Or in the year that Kennedy was assassinated, I worship God. Or in the year that Hurricane Katrina destroyed New Orleans, I worship God. You see, like, God was doing something special with Isaiah, and He was showing him heaven. And He did it in the midst of life. Right in the midst of a sad time, the king had died, he sees the Lord lifted up. God was showing him something special, and if we pay attention, we'll learn from it. It was almost like God was pulling back the curtains, and Isaiah was actually looking into heaven. He was getting a glimpse of what heaven looked like. And so we see that God wasn't waiting on on Isaiah. So I want you to understand this is key. God wasn't waiting for Isaiah to get to where he was so that worship could begin. This was something that was already happening. God wasn't putting on a show for Isaiah. It's like, all right, is everybody ready? Okay, everybody get in place here. 1, 2, 3. All right, move the curtains back. Oh no, wait, angels. You have to say holy louder than that. You have to, it wasn't like some performance, right? This is something that was already happening and that consistently happens in heaven. And this is what's happening. So that's why we call it entering into worship. Okay, entering into worship. You see, we're not trying to conjure up something or fabricate something to please God when we worship. When we worship, it's not something that comes from scratch. We actually enter into worship. Okay, worship is something that is done with our hearts. In other words, we enter into what is already happening. Worship is that's how worship takes us into the very presence of God, because where he is already a place of worship. All right, so I want you to understand that. This is why we sing songs, and this is why we clap our hands, and this is why we lift our hands, because we're simply joining the party. We're not creating anything. We're joining the party. So worship in and of itself is a spiritual act. It's an act that is done from the heart. It is our ability to honor God. Worship is love. It is adoration. It is the feeling or the expression of reverence and adoration to God. Okay, and so they that worship Him, the Bible says, must worship Him in spirit and in truth. So that means worship has to come from the spirit. It has to come from the heart. It's not just that we lift our hands. It's why you're lifting your hands. It's not just the act of bowing before God. It's why. It's the why behind the act. Do you understand? So if like a praise and worship leader says, come on, clap your hands with us. It's not that you're clapping your hands. It's the why. Why are you clapping your hands? If he says, lift your hands in worship, why are you lifting your hands? See, that's worship. Okay, it's not the actual act. It's the why behind it. But praise is a lot simpler to understand than worship. See, praise is the audible expression of worship, which means that there is no such thing as silent praise. Okay, for example, the word hallelujah. That is the highest. Bible tells us that's the highest form of praise that we can give to God. We are actually worshiping God when we say hallelujah, but the words that are coming out of our mouth is considered praise. It's an audible articulation. Is that something you can do without? Do you think that praise and worship is necessary, or do you think it is unnecessary? Okay, worshiping is not just something that we do for God. Praise and worship helps us a lot more. So by now you should recognize that it is most definitely a very important part of worship. I know a lot of people that they not just in my church, but in churches all over the world, we don't mind getting to church as long as we get there in time for the preaching, right? So we're coming late, and we consider ourselves, successful if we get there, before the preacher starts preaching, or, so that we can actually get the message that we came for. But when we do that, we're missing so much more, because we're missing our opportunity to enter in to praise and worship with our church family, okay? To worship together in something that is already participating, or to participate in something that is already happening in heaven. All right, so worship comes from a place of thankfulness and gratitude, and without worship, our heart's going to grow cold, it's going to grow bitter, and praise allows us to articulate that. I hope that makes sense to you. So here we are, right back to the initial question: how do we grow in the area of praise and worship to God? So here's a couple of things before I leave you, and we're just about done. Number one, practical things. Make sure you're in church on time. If you have a problem with punctuality, somebody once told me, if you plan on being there on time, you'll always be late. Plan on being there about 15 minutes early, and even if you're running a little bit late, you'll still be on time. My football coach used to tell me, on time, or early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. So in our church, we do praise and worship Worship is obviously throughout the entire service, but our praise and worship, specifically singing songs and worshiping God, is done at the beginning of the service. So you want to make sure you're there on time, so you hear the call to worship and begin. You can have an opportunity to enter into worship alongside us. So you want to be on time, okay? You don't want to miss that opportunity to worship God. Number 2, truly enter into worship along with the church family. Remember, worship is between you and God. It doesn't matter what you look like, how you're dressed. It doesn't matter how well you can sing, if you can sing better than anybody else. None of that matters. It's just between you and God. God loves your worship. He looks forward to your worship and your praise. And so don't worry about who's looking around you. Don't worry about who's paying attention. It doesn't matter. You focus on God, okay? When you come in your praise and worship and those songs are being sung, you listen to the words and you apply them to your heart and let that fuel you to worship God and articulate that in praise. Also, you can create an atmosphere of praise and worship in your home. Okay, so put on some gospel music. You don't have to just praise God in church. We just do that with our church family. But when you're home, remember, worship is something that's already happening, right? So you can create an atmosphere of praise and worship, right in your own home. Throw some gospel music on, man, and lift your hands in your bedroom or in your living room, in your kitchen while you're cooking. Take every opportunity you can to worship God and give Him praise. And you can do those 3 things just to start, and you'll watch and you'll see your growth in the area of praise and worship will begin to increase. And I'll say this as I close. You can tell people who take this area seriously, and they get into praise and worship. These are strong Christians. These are people that are they're strong, and there's a reason for that, because we're worshiping God, and God sees that. He honors that sacrifice of worship, and He blesses us. There's a great blessing that comes when we worship God. Okay, so let's take a deep breath. That was a heavy lesson. It was short, but definitely a heavy lesson. So let's take time to ingest that, and then tomorrow we can move on to the next lesson. Okay, so feel free to do so when you're ready. You can move on to the next lesson. So I'll see you tomorrow. If you're not ready to do it tomorrow, we only have I think there's one more lesson. There's one more lesson in this series. So if you need to take a break, take an extra day, by all means, but let that ingest, because praise and worship is very, very important, and you'll see us push that in our church services. So when you come, we don't want you to be a spectator just watching. We want you to enter in right along with us, okay? All right, so feel free to move on to the next lesson, and I'll see you tomorrow. And as always, God bless you.